On the morning of 2nd September 2009, at approximately 7:45 a.m., the appeal was riding his motorcycle along Jalan Perusahaan Keknya Pulau Pinang. He suddenly fell into two contiguous potholes measuring about 1.4 meters and 1.6 meters in diameter. The impact threw him off his motorcycle, resulting in physical injuries. The appellant filed a claim for negligence against the District Engineer of JKR, the Director of JKR Penang, and the state government. Both the Magistrate Court and the High Court dismissed the claim. The High Court specifically ruled that the potholes resulted from non-feasance, which is failing to act, rather than misfeasance, which is acting negligently. And thus, the government was protected under statutory immunity. The appellant then appealed to the Court of Appeal.
So the legal issue that arises here is whether the JKR is liable for the breach of statutory duty under Government Procedure Act 1956, specifically for failing to maintain the road properly. So the counsel argument for the appellants argue that the defendants are bound by a legal duty of care to maintain roads in good condition through consistent supervision and regular repairs. So this duty requires them to take prompt action to fix potholes as soon as they arise to ensure the public safety under Section 7 Clause 3 of the Government Procedure Act 1956. A failure to repair a non-hazard constitutes legal negligence. So in this specific case, it is undisputed that the defendants were fully aware of the potholes, yet they failed to carry out any repair work. Therefore, by knowing about the danger and choosing not to act, the defendants were negligent through their omission.
So, the state legal advisor representing JKR argued that there is no reason for the court to change the earlier decision, which the defendants are not liable at all. They pointed out that the defendants had already done their part by inspecting the roads twice a month. Since the area is industrial and full of heavy lorries, potholes are bound to happen. The SLA also relied on Section 3 of the GPA 1966 argued that the government is protected by immunity. Their main point is that for the government to be held liable, you have to prove they did a positive act that was wrong. Simply not doing work or failing to repair the road is just an omission. And according to the SLA, the law says you can sue the government just for that. And the government claims that it can only be negligent if maintenance work were in progress when the accident happened. Since no maintenance works were being carried out at that time, the defendants argue that they cannot be held liable. The argument is based on their interpretation of Section 7 Clause 3 of the GPA 1956. Particularly, the phrase in the execution of any works of construction or maintenance. The defendant interpret this phrase conjunctively, meaning that the words in the execution of any works of must be applied to both construction and maintenance. Therefore, according to the defendants, maintenance must be actively executed for liability to arise.
So, what is the court decision?
Let me tell you. Court held that JKR is liable for the breach of statutory duty. The court referred to Section 7 and Section 5 of the Government Proceeding Act 1956, which decide that can the government be sued for negligence even when it is carrying out public duties? According to Section 5 of the GPA 1956, the government is liable for wrongful acts, negligence, or failures by public officers.
So, the liability is the same as a private employer for its employee, meaning the government is not immune if a public officer is negligent. Okay? So, the government can be sued.
And now, let's look at Section 7 of the GPA 1956. Generally, the government cannot be sued for acts or omission done in exercise of public duties.
Furthermore, what the JKR did was wrong in this case. JKR know about the potholes and the road was busy, which is used by the lorries, motorcycles and heavy vehicles. So, they failed to repair the potholes promptly.
So Farah, as a response to the defendant's argument, even if roads construction and maintenance are linked together, the JKR was still negligent because failing to repair the potholes promptly, and the plaintiff appeal was allowed, and the defendant must pay compensation.
Guys, you know what? I was just recently reading into the accident case and I kinda agree with the judgment made by the Court of Appeal. What do you guys think?
Oh, same. Look at this. Especially when I found out it was 1.6 meter pothole. Like, how does something that big even exist on public road?
Oh my god. Yes, and the worst part is the authorities didn't do nothing.
What?
Like they hide behind excuses like it's just a malfeasance. They didn't know the pothole exists.
So this is why I absolutely agree with the court decision. The court reframed that maintenance as an active, ongoing responsibility. So it basically says that you can just ignore it and hope nothing's happened.
Correct. I agree with you. Yeah, I think so. Like the whole malfeasance defense is so outdated. Like how can someone get permanently injured because they didn't act and they can't be legally acceptable anymore? Right?
Exactly, Anis. The judgment also calls it out that doing nothing is no longer a defense.
No.
Okay, now we'll look at the one of the similar case that relate to this case, which is the case of Renugawati Chinatami and Belati Wangse Sendirian Berhad. In this case, the plaintiff first injured due to the unsafe condition on premises occupied by a private company. So in this context, the misfeasance versus non-feasance distinction was not central to the court's reasoning, and whether the danger arose from an act or an omission. The key question was whether the occupier failed to take reasonable care. The court found that the unsafe condition was foreseeable and that the occupier failed to take reasonable, adequate steps to prevent the harm. As a result, the defendant was held liable for negligence. And now we will compare the two cases specifically in relation to misfeasance and non-feasance.
In Raymond Cheah, the court expressly rejected the traditional common law rule that non-feasance by public authorities does not attract liability. The Court of Appeal held that where a statutory duty exists, failure to act can amount to negligence. In contrast, Renugawati Chinatami did not require the court to draw a distinction between misfeasance and non-feasance. The case reflects a more flexible approach, where liability depends on whether the defendant acted reasonably in the circumstances. Despite the difference, both cases share a common outcome, which is liability arose because the defendant failed to prevent possible harm.
Next, why do I think this case is significant? For years, public authorities like JKR had an escape card called the non-feasance immunity. Basically, if a road was dangerous and they did nothing about it, they couldn't be sued. They only can be sued if they try to fix it and did a poor job. Well, this case just ended that era. The Court of Appeal made it clear that our local law, the Government Proceeding Act 1956, override the outdated English common law principle, which is a non-feasance. This means that the government can no longer hide behind the inaction. So it's a major shift from protecting the state to prioritizing the public safety. Now, public authorities are held to the same professional standard as the private contractors.